because I know Dr. William Karesh so well. He currently serves as the Executive Vice President for Health and Policy for Eco Health Alliance. And in a really coincidental stroke, this morning, Eco Health Alliance was mentioned on the radio several times. Billy could talk more about the mission of Eco Health Alliance, but they're really out there trying to monitor emerging diseases coming out of the tropics and other places around the world. I first had the chance to meet Billy when he was the veterinarian at the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle. Before that, he was with the Smithsonian's National Zoological Park. But my wife, Laura, and I, who many of you know, really had a chance to get to know him, because we not only had the privilege of serving at the Wildlife Conservation Society with Billy, we also had a chance to become a good friend of his. We were neighbors in New York. So the WCS, the Wildlife Conservation Society, not only runs the 5 facilities in and around New York City. Those are the aquarium in Coney Island, the 3 city zoos, and the Bronx Zoo. But they also support at any given time a whole bunch of conservation programs all around the world. And so Billy directed the field veterinary program for WCS. So in addition to being a gifted veterinarian, Billy is also one of the most well-traveled people that you'll ever want to meet. His 1999 book, Appointments at the End of the World, is a delightful book, and it chronicles some of his more notable travels. So at any given time, Billy would have to wing his way to another exotic place, usually pretty remote, to try to help with some of the monitoring that was going on. He developed a dart that could pull a little bit of a tissue sample out of orangutans, for example, just to be able to test the DNA and get a better understanding of the relatedness of these animals and other things about them. He's been part of the Eco Health Alliance for I think, Billy, I don't know, you'll have to tell me exactly, but it's got to be at least the last 10 years, if not more. Losing track of time. He just received an award, and it's from the Wildlife Disease Association. It's the Tom Thorne and Beth Williams Memorial Award. And he also serves as the president of the World Animal Health Organization's Working Group on Wildlife Diseases. I could talk about Billy all day long because I just am so fond of him and so impressed by what he does, but I'd much rather turn it over to Dr. William Karesh. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Billy and let him take over from here.
Okay, thank you, Dan. With the aid of Zoom, clearly it's great to see you again. And you're looking good. And I've been enjoying, and it's wonderful to see the fellowship amongst the group down there in Jacksonville, your club. It was very nice just to be able to listen in for 15 minutes and see that real spirit of connection among you. So that was kind of a joyous thing. I was thinking, oh, I could check email, and then I decided, no, I'm just going to listen and watch. So I love what your group, and for the rest of the group, you've gotten to know Dan, and there's no surprise why that Dan is the president of the Rotary Club this year. So I'm not surprised at all. And I guess all of you know all the reasons for that. And yeah, we used to be next door neighbors. That has to be 30 years ago. And as Dan mentioned, at that point, I was traveling around the world, probably 8 or 10 months a year, and popping back and forth. And it was nice to have Dan and his wife Laura as next door neighbors to look after my place. So I always knew it was safe. I could go away, and when I came back, it would be fine and a safe place to come home to. So I was honored and really pleased when Dan asked me to kind of give this talk. And I think I'll just jump into the slides, and I'll give you a little background. And I might go fairly quickly. So maybe I'll zip through it, and then if you have questions, and we can kind of go back to it in the end rather than pausing for questions in the middle, because I'm a little worried I won't get through it if we do that other approach. So let me share my screen. I too am getting better and better with Zoom.
And by the way, Billy,
Oh, wait,
nice apartment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm still in New York 30 years later. I born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, so I kind of come from that Jacksonville kind of environment. So it's nice to see all of you, and looks like you've gotten some sun down there. You all look healthier than us New Yorkers do now. Could somebody disable the screen sharing on your end? It's not allowing me to do it. Whoever's hosted, I think Ms. Chapman, I think you have to disable screen sharing.
So I'm making you the co-host, and that should allow you to share.
Okay, let's see. Beautiful.
Can share. Okay, try it now. I allowed multiple participants to share their screen.
Okay. Do you see this? You should see
Yes, we see it. Yes.
right. And do you see my big full screen or just a little kind of, which version do you see? Is it filling the screen?
No, it's a screen that has several different slides on it.
Okay, I'm going to switch those. Now, you see a big full screen?
Not yet.
Billy, we're seeing a list of all your slides right now.
I am trying to switch display. How's that look?
Marshall, do you have some word? Can you give him some advice about what to do?
Dan, you were saying? So yeah, let's see. Are you in presenter view right now?
I am.
Okay. At the top, it should say something like swap displays. Sounds like you've tried that.
I tried that twice.
Yep. The only other thing I can think of is to increase the view. And we'll just look at the slides in the current view that we have right now. In this, I mean, it won't be the big full screen, but at least we can see the content. There you go. You made it. Oh, now you're back. There you go. Try that again.
Like.
That's it, yeah.
Oh, did it come? Did it refresh?
What do you see now? Do you see several different slides?
We see your outline view, yeah, of all your slides.
Okay. I'm trying to, I'm sorry for this. Sometimes it, I don't know why
There you go. Oh, you just flip back and forth again.
Yeah, I'd really like to switch screens, and the switch screens. Yeah, I think I can do this. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
No problem, Billy. Billy, you had it a couple times, so.
Really?
Yeah, it came up and then it would go back off. So whatever you were doing there, it seemed like you clicked on a specific slide.
But you're seeing multiple slides, not just one?
That's correct. But there were a couple glimpses. We saw the current slide that's highlighted, the one that says EID reports 50 years, and we saw the Rotary one briefly, and then it reverted back to the multiple slides.
Boy, that's a shame.
Is there an option under slideshow to start the show from the beginning under the slideshow tab there?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that as well.
Yeah. If I thought of it, it's probably not really anything.
It
Well, it's
might
just
be
like
a
a
slide
slideshow.
under view.
Yeah, you're just saying my main slide is very small and you see the upcoming slides, right?
That's correct. We see your whole outline right now.
Let's see if we can.
There you go. You had it, Bill. You had it there for a second.
Well, yeah, isn't that funny? Because
There it is. There it is. We see it.
what do you see?
Just one slide that says where pandemics come from. Oh, now it's gone away.
Okay. How does that?
There it is. That's it.
Is this better?
Yes.
It's really not the present. It's kind of something in between. Okay, I think we can live with this version.
Dan. Yes, Billy.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay. So let me just move on. Thanks for your patience again. So I'm going to talk to you a little about where pandemics come from, and it might be a little different talk than we have about COVID-19. Hopefully, it'll be a little different than what you're hearing every day on the news or reading about with COVID-19. I want to kind of go look under the hood of the car and see what really drives these events. And I really wanted to get into this concept of One Health, and I liked it because it's actually in the main Rotary kind of mission. And I pulled this off the website from the Rotary International website about even with the polio program using a One Health approach. This is near and dear to my heart because this term One Health is a term that I coined 17 years ago when we were talking about outbreaks. At that time, we were talking about Ebola outbreaks, and I was interviewed, and the journalist was saying, like, well, is this a human health problem, or is this a wildlife health problem, or livestock? What kind of health problem is this? And I said, well, there's really just one health, because we share all of these diseases, or 3/4 of these emerging diseases, and I'll get into that with you, between humans and animals and the environment. So this One Health thing has grown at a global scale. So I was very excited to see that Rotary has picked up on that and realized the implications and the usefulness of that approach to protecting the health of people. Now, our organization, EcoHealth Alliance, the Alliance part of our name, the eco part, I'll start with the beginning. The eco part is about ecology. It's not about what we think of just being eco in the sense of green or clean. That's not what we mean by that. We're talking about the ecology, which is how systems work, and health. And so we're looking at about the system, the underlying health components of ecological components of diseases. And the alliance is that we have partners around the world. And right now it's close to 70 partner organizations, and we network. It might be a little like Rotary International, but you have sister organizations around the world, and we do too. We don't actually share funds or trade money, but we all kind of have share a kind of a mission to work in the same direction. In part of our work, we do a lot of analytics and quantitative work and modeling. So one of the things we did was looked at emerging infectious diseases, EIDs, and we looked at every emerging disease that's occurred over the last 50 years. So emerging disease is a new disease like COVID-19, or maybe an old disease popping up in a new place. Or it could be an old disease that suddenly had become a big problem again. It wasn't a big problem before. So Zika virus is an old disease that showed up in a new place 2 years ago in South America and even into the southern parts of the US, into Florida. We would call that an emerging disease also. When you map those out, it looks like certain parts of the world are at higher risk of an emerging infectious disease than other parts of the world. But this doesn't really inform us about what's going on in the future. What it is, it's a retrospective look. And it's very biased because most reports of emerging infectious diseases happen to be from where there's good universities, there's good scientists, there's good hospitals, so they tend to report them. And in other parts of the world, they don't know that they had an outbreak. People are just dying, but no one knows what it is. So it's a very biased view of the world. So what we have done is we took every one of those disease occurrences, there are about 250 emerging diseases in 50 years, and we broke down what caused them, what was the underlying factor behind that. And what we see, what drives disease emergence are basically human activities, changes in the way we grow food, international trade, of course, and commerce, changing land when you clear land or you change wetlands, those kind of things. There's some that are due to medical industry, and then it breaks down, there's some other little causes. So what we do is, instead of mapping the history of these diseases, that's a backwards look, we mapped out where the risk factors are, what's driving disease emergence. Let's do a map of the world where these risk factors occur, and those turn out to be, in the future, where the riskiest places are. So we were the first ones to create this hotspots map for disease emergence. And you see now, it's very different than that other map. You see a balanced view of where the risk of emerging diseases, and emerging diseases are what turn into pandemics, so where the risk is. And we've modified that more recently. 2 years ago, we came up with some better algorithms and better models, and we can map those, and these are the factors: population, biodiversity, land use change, especially deforestation where it's changed to pasture. Those are risk factors for disease emergence, and we can map out where they are. And you see in the map there that Southeast Asia, South Asia, China, up into China are really hot places, but also in Africa, West Africa and East Africa. And as you remember, the Ebola outbreaks, those are exactly where they occur. So, and we did this map, this approach before knowing about those outbreaks. So this is a kind of a good predictive way to look like, where should we be worried about diseases occurring? Where should we be paying attention? Of course, as you know, now everybody's realizing, but for the last 10 years, we've been trying to stress the fact that these emerging diseases and pandemics have horrible economic consequences and way beyond the medical cost. So we've been doing some work with the World Bank over the years to really drive it down into that. What are those costs, and who suffers, who pays the price? And the medical cost really never show up as being very significant to the total cost of a pandemic. So we've been pushing this idea for years now. I think now with the COVID-19, it's become very obvious that the medical costs are very low compared to the cost to economies, to business, airlines, agriculture, livestock, mining, tourism. You're experiencing all of those in Florida. But you can see this has been going on for years, and we produced this chart. We haven't even updated it in 2 years. So we've been ahead of the game in discussing why these emerging diseases are so serious and why we need to prevent them, because once they start happening, it's very hard to get them under control once they get started and running. So we really believe that reducing the number of emerging disease events and outbreaks is the key to success. We've also done a lot of work to show what animals they come from, because 75% of all these emerging diseases come from animals, and particularly wildlife. 75% come from wildlife. And we can look, and this is a kind of a geeky, sciencey chart, but on the right, those dots spread out off to the right is the number of viruses in these different groups of animals. And on the left, you'll see the proportion, the percentage of those that are zoonotic, which means they go from animals to people. And what we see is bats and primates and rodents, and a little bit with carnivores, but really bats and primates and rodents have a lot of viruses that can infect people. And now that we've looked at that more closely, we're seeing those are hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of viruses out there that could infect people. So let's just now go into coronaviruses, which COVID-19 is one of many coronaviruses. And we have a long history of coronaviruses getting it from animals into people. In fact, four different coronaviruses cause a common cold in humans. And what we know, two of those in the middle section there, two of these common cold viruses in humans have come from bats. And it looks like that happened in the 16 or 1700s, that those coronaviruses jumped into humans and became a common cold virus. We don't know how serious those were when they started. We don't have good histories of that. But over the last couple of hundred years, we just call them the common cold. When there's many, many viruses that cause the common cold, not all of them are coronaviruses. There's quite a few other virus families that cause the common cold, but a few of them are coronaviruses, and we know two of those came from bats. And then we've had big outbreaks like SARS, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, and MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, and now this one are bat-related coronaviruses that have caused pandemics, big outbreaks and pandemics. We've been working in China and Southeast Asia for probably 10, 15 years, and looking at these viruses since the first SARS outbreak. And we have been doing sampling of animals and humans all through southern China for years. So you can see this is 2014, 2018, just over 4 years. We sampled over 10,000 bats and looked at what viruses they had. So we've gotten tens of thousands of bat samples, and where those red dots are, in the little yellow ones, and those red dots are where we found coronaviruses in bats. And when we do serology, you've heard about people talking about serology and also PCR testing. This is not serology. This is actually like the COVID-19 nasal swab. This is you actually detect the virus itself. And on the left are different species of bats. These are horseshoe bats. I'll show you a picture in a second. And at least one, two, three, 4, 5, or 6, 7 different species, you see that 1% or 3% or up to 8% of the bats we caught and did a little nasal swab were PCR. They actually had coronaviruses in them. So it's a very common thing in bats, particularly in Asia, a little in North America. And of course, these are they're beautiful bats. These are all insect-eating bats. And of course, we know for insectivorous bats, they play a huge role in eating mosquitoes, but mostly in the US, the big role is in eating agricultural pests, because the bats are out at night, so they eat the agricultural pests, like there's corn moths, and a lot of agricultural pests are actually nocturnal, and the bats in the Midwest feed on those. The estimates of losing bats in the US is about $2 to $3 billion a year would have to be used in pesticides to compensate if we lost bats in the Midwest in the US. So they provide a free service to farmers in agricultural crop production that would have to be paid for by farmers in pesticide use if we didn't have bats. So they play a big role in the environment and around the world, and especially in the US. So what are all those viruses I said we were finding? This is called a phylogenetic tree. So it's kind of a genetic tree, like you might have a family tree of relatedness. And all those in red are coronaviruses we found in bats that are related to this group of SARS-like viruses. And that one kind of down in the bottom in the middle, I don't know if my pointer will work. Yes, this one is the one that looks like the human COVID-19 virus. So we've found over 500 coronaviruses in bats in Southeast Asia and East Asia and China. And about 50 of those are in this family group that COVID-19 is, or SARS was. And those bats are really well distributed. So what we're seeing here is geographic distribution of that whole group of bats. There's about 10 or 15 species of bats. And now that we've been testing them over the years, we know they have these same coronaviruses like COVID-19. And we can start to extrapolate about risk to humans once again. Instead of waiting 10 years from now to see what happened, we can start to look forward. And from the data, kind of give you that summary, what we did was in southern China here, we sampled the bats first. Then we started identifying which groups of bats had coronaviruses, and then we went and actually tested people. So down at the bottom, those are the test results from humans, and we use serology, like this new test that's being promoted for COVID-19. And serology tells you if historically people have been infected, not infected the day you test them, but historically have they had the virus. Just like if we got tested for measles, we would test serology positive because we had it either when we were young or you were vaccinated for it. So serology gives us a history of individual people. And we see about 0.5% to 3% of the people we tested in southern China to be positive for this group of coronaviruses. So this has been going on for a while. This is old work. It's not new work. It's from 3 and 4 and 5 years ago. When we look at the number of people that are living in the situation exposed to bats, it looks like about 3 to 20 million people have been infected with this group of viruses over the last 10 to 15 years. That's our kind of our best guess. So this is a common, this is going on all the time about people being exposed to bats, probably to their urine or their feces. You know, bats live in, go up in the roofs of people's houses. They're in their barns if they go outside, if they keep animals, or if they store food outside. You see bats are pretty common. Bats live in trees. Some live in caves and they're flying out in large numbers. So there is exposure. People harvest bat guano for fertilizer, just like bird guano is used for fertilizer. It's very common, especially in Southeast Asia, and that's used as a free, cheap fertilizer. And so people will go into bat caves and collect the guano off the floor and shovel it out and spread it on their food and on their fields so to grow crops. There's a lot of tourism like we have in the US with cave tourism, and of course there's bats in those caves. So we've been doing educational outreach in Asia, but also in Africa and in South America to work with local communities to teach them how to avoid getting infected. Now, of course, we can't avoid all of those, but we can reduce the number. And if we're thinking millions of people have been exposed, if we can just start to reduce that number, because most of those exposures or infections are just dead ends. And just what happens is every few years, maybe 5 or 10 years, one of those viruses catches hold in humans and starts spreading. Another way people are really getting exposed to these bat viruses and wildlife viruses in general, of course, is the wildlife trade. So this is a typical market. This is actually in Indonesia. This is not in China, but all through Southeast Asia, they're live, what we call wet markets. They don't have refrigeration and they don't use refrigeration. So they bring animals in. So that's pork on the left, and those are bats on the table. And you can see somebody chopping up the bats, and people are coming and buying them. And there's blood on his hands because no one's bothered to tell people that they should wash their hands or wear gloves or make any rules like that. So I think there's a lot of things we can do to start intervening. One is we could also reduce the trade in wildlife, especially for endangered species. And some wildlife trade's really good, some wildlife trade's really bad. So we have to be careful about when we talk about intervention. But this wildlife trade is a regional thing for Southeast Asia. It's all between the countries. There's not just one country. There's consumers and producers, and for different products, they like different things. So this could be the same kind of trade route map. Could be paper towels, or it could be running shoes. In this case, it's wildlife. And then we use that kind of same global trade. I think Florida is a huge exporter of turtles into China. So we export tremendous numbers of turtles into China, actually for the food for food consumption in China. So let's get into COVID-19 specifically. So there has been a lot of talk about these wildlife markets, and I do think there is a risk. But interestingly, with COVID-19 in Wuhan, you can see this timeline, and down here in the middle were these cases that were related to the seafood market. Now, of course, seafood is very low risk. We do not get pandemics coming from seafood. Sometimes you get a little foodborne illness. You know, people get certainly illness from eating undercooked or raw seafood, but those things don't ever turn into pandemics. They turn into local outbreaks. Sometimes they're spread around the country a bit, but they don't go person to person to person to person. They do not become pandemics. So seafood's a safe thing. But in these markets, they're always mixed. And people said in the Wuhan market, there were other animals in there and there's wildlife. And that's not surprising because those markets, like I showed you a picture of, there's hundreds of thousands of those in Asia and in Africa, and thousands of people go into them every day and get exposed. So it's a pretty common event. What we do know now is they're down on this bottom line for a couple of weeks now, looking backwards, there were some human cases, 1 or 2 or 3 human cases on any given day before that big market, before those people in the market were diagnosed. But no one knew about these early ones, or they weren't detected, which isn't surprising because if 1 or 2 people, I know you have a doctor in your group, if somebody comes into the hospital and they have pneumonia, it's not that surprising. And you run some tests and a week or 2 later, the tests come back negative. And then you're going like, oh, that's strange. I wonder why all the tests didn't tell us what was wrong. So there's always a time lag in the beginning, of course, where you don't think anything big is going on. In this case, as I started to get more and more of them, the Chinese were able to send it to a research laboratory in these human cases from the market. And the research laboratory said, oh, that looks like a bat virus that we worked on 5 or 7 years ago. And they took the old virus out of the freezer after around this time when they were getting lots of cases, and they did a genetic similarity, and it was about 96% the same as the bat virus they had in the freezer from those slides I showed you earlier, because that work was done 6 or 7 years ago. And because I was trained originally as a veterinarian, I thought I'd throw in a little animal stuff. We do know that animals can pick up the virus. In most cases, they aren't getting very sick. There's a commercial test now for dogs, IDEX, and also now there's the other group that's owned by Mars, Antech. There's ITEX and 2 big diagnostic labs in the US. They're kind of like Quest labs for humans. They found 2 positive dogs in New York, and another one now, there's one in North Carolina. Most of the dogs don't show any signs of illness. The one in North Carolina had a little dry cough, but wasn't ill. The only reason it was tested is because its owners were very sick. That's also what happened in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, whenever they go take, if they have to go in, there's a really sick person and the person has to go to a hospital, Hong Kong provides free pet care for anybody who's sick and can't take care of their pets. And so they've been routinely testing pets from sick patients, from sick human patients. They've found 2 dogs that were positive, and both of those dogs were fine and recovered. There's a case in Belgium. I think we're going to start seeing a lot of positive cats. Cats are very susceptible. Little baby cats, like 6 and 8 week old, 12-week-old cats get really sick, but adult cats don't seem to get really sick, and they all recover. So none of them have been shown to be a source of the virus for humans. They all seem to get it from infected people. Same with the lions and tigers in the zoos up here in New York, but we'll probably see that more too. They probably got it from sick people. And ferrets, a lot of people have pet ferrets. And ferrets are very susceptible, but they don't get sick, but they can give it to each other. So just interesting, showing the circle of life about how these diseases emerge in animals, they get into humans, and then of course we can give them back, and we can give them back to animals because we're all connected. And so I will stop there, but I have gotten very close to the end of your time, haven't I?
You have. You did an excellent job. Excellent job, Billy. It leaves us with some time for questions. Do you have time? Are you able to hang in there?
Yes, I can give you, let's see what time, 4 or 5 minutes, yes.
Okay. Well, and the other thing everyone should know, if you have questions that we can't get to, if you can get them to me, I will send them on to Dr. Karesh, and we'll see if we can get some answers if you're not able to ask. So if anybody has a question, please feel free.
One slide, one of the earlier slides I saw where you were showing, it was kind of a purple background and is showing yellow areas where there was mainly in Southeast Asia, but also it looked like there was a strip of yellow going down the east coast of the US.
Yes, sir. And that would be the risk map. So that is based on where there's a lot of land use change. That could be suburban development areas. It could be shopping malls. It could be converting land for different reasons. And so it could be even reforesting, previous land. It could be planting new trees. We're agnostic about which direction. So everybody goes like, oh, cutting down forest is really bad. But actually, as forests grow back, building new forests is also risky. We've seen that in New England with Lyme disease and ticks, and it really is where there's a lot more forest now and there's more deer. So it's really about the change. It's not about the direction of the change. So the East Coast of the US would kind of fall into a category where there's a lot of development, and also human populations are changing. As you know, down in the South and Florida, a lot of people are moving there. So it's a bigger population than it was 15 years ago. So that's also a risk factor. And there's still a lot of wildlife down the East Coast. So you bring those things together and that increases risk.
So
Other
I
question.
have a question. So in the same map, you showed China as highlighted really yellow and India. And what we've been reading, India doesn't have that many cases as the Italy or Europe. Is that just a future possibility? Is that what it is for?
That was a projection of a new the risk of a new disease.
Oh, I see.
Such as
Okay.
COVID. That is not a projection of the number of cases. That's a very different kind of modeling exercise. We are talking about where will the next new pandemic emerge, and those are the risk areas.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Yes. So, and in the past few years, we've had Zika, and that fell into that category. We had the flu pandemic out of parts of Mexico. That area is highlighted. So it's in the Ebola outbreaks in DRC and West Africa. And you can see those areas, their risks tend to be where these diseases come from. Of course, with airline travel and spread and all of that, soon they become global. Yes, that happens pretty quickly. Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question, if you can take it. If you could give us an idea over like the Ebola and how long they actually took before we could get our hands around this thing. Can you give us any projections from how you feel or how many years or months or whatever else it's going to take care of this particular nuisance?
I wish I could tell you. I mean, there's different parts of that. And one is how do we get it how do we slow down that rate of spread, which is that's what's happening now. at some point, I see this new COVID-19. Let's just compare it to SARS. SARS, when that got started, there were a few cases and it was spreading around with travel. But it didn't spread from person to person very well. And so we had hospital workers get it, but they kind of isolated those people and the virus basically disappeared. The other version, the other extreme is those bat viruses I told you about that became the common cold. And now we've had those for several hundred years and they've kind of adapted to humans. And I think this COVID-19 is going to be somewhere in between those two. And I think, this is just my opinion, I think it'll become kind of established as another type of viral pneumonia, much like we have 8 other viruses that cause viral pneumonia. And for those, we've kind of learned some ways to treat them. For some, you can be vaccinated. So I think for COVID-19, when we have a vaccine, if and when we have a vaccine, and as we have better treatments, we just won't worry about it so much because not many people will be getting it. A lot of people by that time will have had it and recovered. So we'll have, like they call it herd immunity. That's what we call in veterinary medicine. So it's hard to spread when a lot of people have already had it and recovered and are immune. And when some are vaccinated, and for the few people that get it, the hospitals will be very geared up with better treatment. So I think there's a good likelihood that this will be one of the human viral pneumonias that we've learned to live with, and we don't really talk about it very much because we've kind of have it basically under control.
As a follow-on to that, do you personally feel that we're doing the right thing and we're putting the pressure in the right places? I mean, it's such a goat rope right now, because of the politics. And how do you personally feel about what we're doing to take this thing into our arms?
I certainly think we're doing the right thing. I think we just need to keep doing more of it. And then about the social distancing and opening up businesses, I support that as long as it's done, smartly and with concern and at a very local and individual level. So, if you've got restaurant owners that, they're pretty clued in and they can think about really a good way to do it, then I think that's really great. If you're just going to throw it wide open and go like, well, we just hope people figure it out, that makes me really nervous. So I think, there's a smart way to do it. And unfortunately, I think it's going to take a while for this thing to run through its course, and that's to have better treatments and to have a vaccine and for people to get comfortable. But it's certainly not the end of the world. I mean, we've seen worse disease outbreaks, and we've gotten through them, and we've found cures for them. So I'm optimistic about that. The next month or 2 or 3 might still be tough, and that's tough going.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sure.
Hey, Billy, just you may want to keep yourself off camera, but just so you know, your camera's not been on while you're answering these questions.
No, I don't know. Ever since I stopped sharing my screen, it just went blank and black, and I've been trying to click on it to make it change. And
that's okay. We can hear you fine.
Okay.
Are you able to take 1 or 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else for Dr. Karesh? I have a question, Billy.
Okay.
Is there any evidence, or has there been monitoring that the rural areas of China, the folks in the rural areas of China, are they showing any level of immunity to this coronavirus or others, rather than the people in the cities who would have not been exposed for the same duration or the same frequency?
That's a great question. And when I showed that map of where we were sampling people and animals, I should have pointed that out. Those were all rural areas. Those were not in cities. So that was totally that 1 or 2 or 3% of the population. Those were rural communities and rural populations. Of course, in China, that is hundreds of millions of people, because there are a lot of people, there's 1 billion people there. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of people living in rural areas. And so those results were, but what we're seeing, and if you really wanted my opinion, if I had to guess how those things started, I think it was rural people coming, how they come to cities to work. They're factory workers and workers, and then of course they go home to their communities on vacations and time in between. And there's a huge movement of people in China between rural areas and urban areas for work. And we see that coronaviruses are getting into people so much there, it really only would take one person or a couple of people to go to Wuhan or go to Beijing and start an epidemic just coming from the countryside. And let's say 2 million of them had a virus like this. It only takes 2 or 3 for the virus to mutate. Like think about it as lottery tickets. If you're a virus and you want to jump between an animal and a person, the odds are really low. It's about like winning the lottery. But if you buy 4 or 5 million lottery tickets, your chances are pretty good. So we're thinking about 3 or 4 million people get these right. Only one of them has to turn into the epidemic.
I think we're at a pretty good stopping point, I think, at this stage, because we're a little over our meeting time. I can't thank you enough, Billy, for sharing those insights. It's fascinating, and good luck. Are you traveling? Have you been traveling before all this? Have you been in China with some frequency?
No. Everything's gone to Zoom and virtual meetings around the world, and and you can see I'm working from home. Well, now you can't see that I'm working from home, but I am working from home.
Well, I want you to know, we really appreciate it. Thank you on behalf of all our members. I want you to know that Laura sends her love as well.
Okay, please give her my best. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. Drew Bisbee let me know that while he's listed for the 4-way test, he does not have a microphone. So he extends his apologies. So we'll need someone to conduct the 4-way test. Drew Story, would you want to do that honors for us? Drew, are you still there?
I'll do it, Dan. I turned my mic on.
Oh, you hear me now?
I got you.
Okay, go ahead, Drew.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hold on 1 second, Drew. 1 second. I just want to let people know for next week, we've locked in on thanks Jim Lanier and past President Jimmy Kelly and President-elect Mary Pat. We've locked in Daniel Davis, who heads up the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce. So he'll be speaking to us next week. Go ahead, Drew, if you would like to lead us on the 4-way test. Everybody, please stay safe out there.
4-way test are things we think, say, and do. First,
This is
Is it the truth?
second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
third,
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
and fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you all. It's great seeing your faces. Stay well, stay safe, stay apart. Thanks. Until next week.
Take care, everybody. Okay.
See you, Larry.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.